poorly designed city is not just a map riddled with errors. It's wasted time, deteriorating health, and opportunities that evaporate amidst impossible intersections and distances that feel inhuman. From the air, almost all of them look coherent. It's at street level that the truth is revealed. What we call worst design here is not an aesthetic condemnation, but a functional diagnosis. Decisions that prioritize car speed over pedestrian speed, the allure of the image over the efficiency of daily life, the short-term gain of construction over the long-term concerns of climate and water. 8 cities, 8 different ways of stumbling over the same obstacle, forgetting that ultimately the city is the place where a body walks, waits for shade, and seeks a logical route between home, work, and life. 1. Dubai. Dubai is a constructed manifesto. The idea that the future can be assembled from icons, artificial islands, and skyscrapers. The problem arises when we try to inhabit it. The scale of its components, multi-lane highways, mega blocks, avenues with endless medians, dilutes what makes a neighborhood pleasant. Continuity of facades, shade, short and easily navigable routes. The extreme climate transforms every spatial decision into a thermal one. A treeless sidewalk isn't an oversight, it's a ban on leaving home between May and September. The glass walkways connecting shopping malls and towers are climate-controlled shortcuts that replace public space, and street life is relegated to nighttime hours or indoors. There are clear merits: a diversifying economy, a fast and clean metro, waterfront regeneration projects. But the contradiction persists. When luxury depends on air conditioning and accessibility depends on cars, the city functions like a perpetual airport, efficient for transit but hostile to walking. High-density housing in Marina or JBR coexists with a mobility system that necessitates bridges, overpasses, and detours that multiply walking distances. The result is urban planning that looks stunning on postcards but becomes tiresome in daily life. Reaching a beach 200 meters away requires navigating a labyrinth of barriers, and going down to buy bread becomes an excursion. Dubai demonstrates that modernity is not just a matter of height, but of proximity. If what is essential is far away, the design fails, even if it shines. The future, if it is to be livable, will have less marble and more shade. 2. Houston. Houston represents the most extreme version of every man for himself. The absence of traditional zoning allowed for the free mixing of uses, but this unregulated mix doesn't guarantee cohesive neighborhoods. A restaurant next to a workshop and an office building doesn't constitute a city if a parking lot the size of a town square and a road designed for 80 kilometers per hour separate them. Unrestricted expansion turned drainage into a structural challenge. Impermeable surfaces, reduced wetlands, and entire neighborhoods dependent on infrastructure designed for a smaller city. The result is well known: vulnerability to storms and daily commutes that require a car for almost everything. This dependence on cars not only makes life more expensive, fuel, insurance, maintenance, but it also distorts time. The daily commute ceases to be an opportunity for connection and becomes a series of islands: garage, highway, parking lot. And yet, Houston also boasts remarkable economic energy and genuine diversity, vibrant culinary corridors, top-tier universities, and a growing tech industry. The question is how to translate that potential into a more resilient urban network. Retention parks that function as green infrastructure, high-priority mass transit corridors, and intermediate-density developments that bring services closer without driving up prices. When neighborhoods of single-family homes incorporate mid-rise housing alongside amenities and shops, the car ceases to be essential and the city begins to fit together. It's not about prohibiting anything, but about making possible what is currently difficult. Crossing a street without risking life and limb, waiting for a bus knowing it will arrive, finding a supermarket within a 10-minute walk. If the city wants its next major investment to be something other than another lane, it must commit to something more challenging: proximity. Houston has the talent, it lacks the finesse. 3. Los Angeles. Los Angeles was born fragmented and learned to move on wheels. The grid of arteries a mile apart, the single-family home suburbs, and the freeway network shaped a metropolis of constant transitions. From neighborhood to interchange, from interchange to parking lot, from parking lot to destination. For decades, the solution to any congestion was to add lanes, and the paradox of induced demand did the rest. More capacity, more traffic, same gridlock. Now the same city that dismantled its historic streetcar system is trying to stitch its pieces back together with subway and light rail lines, BRT corridors, and complete streets. The contradiction is clear. Contemporary infrastructure inserted into urban fabric that for years reinforced segregated uses and low density. A new station functions as an urban anchor if it's surrounded by housing, shops, and services. If it's just a sea of parking, it becomes a detached, isolated point. Furthermore, rising housing costs are driving people to underserved suburbs, lengthening commutes and further straining the road system. And yet, change is happening. Boulevards regaining shade, bike paths connecting neighborhoods, and small sidewalk widening projects where previously only a rearview mirror could fit. Los Angeles is discovering the value of the in-between. Buildings of 4 to 8 stories above active commercial spaces, courtyards that humanize the scale, streets that frame the mountains and the ocean as everyday landscapes. Cinema gave it a narrative of horizons. Urban planning is giving it back one of proximity. In Los Angeles, bad design isn't an isolated failure. It's a legacy that's being corrected street by street, permit by permit, tree by tree. Quattro, Brasilia. Brasilia is a perfect paradox. The most deliberate planning of the 20th century created a city difficult to navigate on foot. The superblocks offered a hygienic and orderly vision, housing, schools, local shops. But the scale of the distances and the hierarchy of roads pushed the automobile to the center of the system. The monumental axis impresses as a sculptural ensemble, not as an everyday space. Distances between buildings designed to emphasize perspectives, not to facilitate errands. Real life shifted to more organic satellites where corner shops, bars, and informal bus stops emerged. Everything the plan sought to rationalize. It's not a total failure, it's an incomplete success. Signature architecture coexists with voids that people fill as best they can. Shortcuts trodden across the grass, makeshift kiosks, ephemeral markets beneath stilts. Brasilia works when this friction is allowed, when the superblocks permit mixed uses and short, well-defined paths that fit together the daily routine. The lesson is clear. Urban planning without chance produces a perfect backdrop for ceremonies, but insufficient for lives. A good plan guarantees structure, but the city needs porosity. Multiple small decisions that allow for the improvisation of routes, uses, and encounters. Where the pedestrian is merely a spectator of monumentality, the monumentality ends up empty. Humanizing Brasilia doesn't mean denying its founding gesture, but rather bringing it closer to the scale of a conversation. 5. Brussels. Brussels seems designed through debate. Administrative fragmentation, regions, municipalities, overlapping jurisdictions, turns every street into a fragile agreement. The result is a landscape of scars. Demolitions from the 1960s that left empty spaces for decades. Thoroughfares that act as moats between neighborhoods, and disparate regulations that change from one side of the street to the other. Brusselization, a sum of incoherent micro-decisions, produced interior blocks filled with parking lots, fragmented facades, and a mobility system where cars occupy what management doesn't. And yet, in that same city, some of the best examples of reclaiming space coexist. Squares that have expelled cars to attract people, school streets that remind us that speed is not a right, and cycling networks that, although still in their infancy, are beginning to become continuous. Neighborhood markets are regaining a human scale, and urban stitching projects are transforming sections of the inner ring road into livable boulevards. Brussels teaches us that the worst urban design may not be in the plan itself, but in its governance. When every project is an endless negotiation, the city is left halfway there. The challenge isn't so much building more as making better decisions and sustaining those decisions over time. Fewer pilot projects that fizzle out with the political cycle, and more network policies that become the norm. When the standard changes, 30 km/h zones, pedestrian priority in city centers, underground parking garages transformed into public facilities, the city stops depending on the heroic nature of a single project and starts relying on a coherent set of principles. Brussels doesn't need a new icon. It needs consistency. Enam, Jakarta. Jakarta is racing against time. The city is sinking in parts of its territory due to the overexploitation of aquifers. The sea level is rising, rainfall is becoming more extreme, and informal settlements are encroaching on the most vulnerable areas. In this context, every square meter of paved surface, every new multi-lane road, and every wall separating the river from the neighborhood adds pressure to the system. Mobility has improved with BRT and metro networks, but the streets remain a patchwork of obstacles. Interrupted sidewalks, intersections designed for motorized traffic, and scant shade in a relentless climate. While the transfer of capital functions to another region is being debated, Jakarta reminds us that urban design is also about water management. Channeling when there is excess, retaining when needed, and working with the cycle instead of denying it. Floodable parks in critical watersheds, mangrove restoration as a natural defense, and safe high-rise housing to relocate at-risk settlements are all part of the same strategy. When combined with transportation corridors and local commerce, the neighborhood ceases to be a trench against the rain and becomes a sponge that withstands the wet season without collapsing. The difficulty lies in the scale and the economics. Intervening in thousands of hectares already occupied requires fine-tuning governance and resources, but even small gestures, a well-sized tree pit, a green roof at a school, a street that allows water to flow in and out without causing damage, contribute to resilience. Jakarta is not a lost cause. It is a reminder that climate is no longer a backdrop, but the script. 7. Beijing. Beijing ordered its growth with rings and generous avenues, and this circular logic has ended up stratifying daily life. The farther from the center, the longer the commute. The closer, the greater the pressure on real estate development. The large-scale infrastructure is impeccable, but it imposes barriers on the small. A pedestrian becomes an anomaly amidst fences, underpasses, and bridges that add minutes to every crossing. The subway network is gigantic and yet still lags behind demand. Restrictions on private cars have alleviated some of the gridlock, but the city still confuses traffic flow with road width. The renovation of the city center erased layers of traditional urban fabric and, with them, the micro-accessibility that allows people to get around in 5 or 10 minutes on foot. Where restored hutongs persist, a promising balance emerges: courtyards, alleyways, local shops, and slower mobility. The challenge is to bring this logic to new developments. Gentle radii that traverse superblocks, affordable housing and transport hubs, and a clear priority for those who move around on foot. Beijing doesn't need more rings, it needs more fine connections. Pedestrian and cycling axes that stitch neighborhoods together, parks that function as climate corridors, and regulations that reward mixed-use development on the ground floor. The city that was once a cycling icon can become one again if it understands cycling as top-tier infrastructure. Massive parking facilities at stations, straightforward intersections, seamless access. Design fails when it forces people to choose between time and money to experience the city. It succeeds when it gives back precious minutes of life without asking permission. 8. Phoenix. Phoenix is the urban laboratory under the sun. The grid of spaced-out arteries and superblocks promises order and smooth traffic flow, but produces the opposite. Long commutes, high speeds, and sidewalks that feel merely symbolic. In a climate that frequently exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, shade is not just decoration, it's infrastructure. A tree doesn't just cool a postcard, it lowers the temperature and makes a 10-minute walk possible. Water scarcity forces a reevaluation of every landscaping choice. Ornamental lawns that require constant watering, swimming pools that evaporate, fountains that don't recycle water. The paradox is clear. The low-density model with green spaces clashes with the reality of the desert. When high-density developments appear along corridors well-served by public transport, light rail or BRT, and mixed-use developments are introduced at ground level, the city begins to function on a human scale. Awnings, arcades, brise soleil, courtyards that capture breezes, and materials that reduce the urban heat island effect. Surface parking, transformed into buildings or parks with permeable paving, alters the perceived temperature of the surroundings. Phoenix is not unviable. What is unviable is continuing to treat it as if it weren't a desert. An oasis-like urbanism, continuous shade, water managed as a scarce and valuable resource, street rhythms adapted to the climate, transforms a rigid grid into a livable sequence of places. The key lies in climatic proximity, that daily commutes can always be made in the shade, that amenities are within reasonable distance, and that public transport is reliable even on extreme weather days. Phoenix could be a model for 21st century warm cities if it decides that its main infrastructure is not roads, but shade. Perhaps there are no worse designed cities, but rather decisions that, when combined, alienate people from their own city. The important thing is that everyone can read their neighborhood like a text. If it takes longer to cross the street than to get there, if shade is a luxury, if the bus stop is far from everything, the problem isn't you, it's the design. Changing it doesn't require a new utopia, but rather patience and prioritization. In the next video, we'll explore how some cities are reinventing themselves with small but cumulative interventions that improve daily life. If you're interested in following this journey, subscribe and join us for the next episode.